The White House is barring Chinese airline companies from flying to the U.S. Beijing already isn't letting U.S. carriers come to China. A nurse in China has been denied work-related injury compensation. She fell into a coma after working over 40 days straight, battling the virus on the front lines in Wuhan. Another city in China wants to follow Wuhan's mass testing initiative. The city of nearly 3 million has not reported many cases, making many wonder if the situation is worse than it seems. And China's controversial telecom giant Huawei is taking another blow. Two of Canada's largest telecom companies have made a decision to effectively lock Huawei out of the country's 5G networks. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Over 9 million citizens in Wuhan were tested for the CCP virus in May. Now, the northeastern Chinese city of Mudanjiang will follow suit. It has a population of 2.6 million people. Mudanjiang City only reported a handful of asymptomatic cases of the virus over the past few days. But the local situation may tell another story. Trains are suspended, bus terminals are closed, some schools are once again shuttered. Some neighborhoods are under lockdown. A video shows workers installing a gate to seal an entrance of a residential building. A police car is parked close by. A June 1st video has gone viral among Chinese netizens showing rioters outside the White House. One of them, speaking in Mandarin, told others, "Go, go, hurry up, go, go, go." The person's accent doesn't appear to be from Hong Kong or Taiwan, but from mainland China. A netizen asked if the man had just arrived in the U.S. because he did not speak English. He added that the FBI should go after people with ties to the Chinese Communist Party and find out if they were given orders or paid by the Chinese consulate. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with leaders of the 1989 Tiananmen student movement on June 2nd. June 4th is the 31st anniversary of the bloody repression of the democracy movement carried out by the Communist Party's troops. In a tweet, Pompeo criticized the Chinese Communist Party and Hong Kong authorities for banning a vigil to mark the anniversary. He said if there is any doubt about Beijing's intent, it is to deny Hong Kongers a voice and a choice, making them the same as mainlanders. For the first time, Hong Kong officials denied permission for the Tiananmen Square vigil, citing concern over the virus epidemic, but organizers say it's an excuse. Chinese state media has been raving about the protests in America, using them as an excuse to slam the U.S. democratic system. The reports stirred up disgust among viewers. But the reports have left out vital facts and have misled the public. Firstly, the reports fail to mention the Minneapolis Police Department fired all 4 officers involved in George Floyd's death the day after the incident. It also neglected to announce that the FBI and Justice Department were investigating at President Trump's request and that he expressed condolences to Floyd's family. They left out that Derek Chauvin, the police officer seen pressing his knee into Floyd's neck, was arrested and charged with murder and manslaughter. And that the White House National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, said that when Trump first saw video of the Floyd incident on Air Force One, he immediately published a tweet calling for an investigation. He also reportedly called Attorney General Barr, asking him to investigate. Secondly, the Chinese media reports highlight the right of the American public to peacefully protest, a freedom that doesn't exist in China. In the wake of Floyd's death, protests erupted across the nation. Trump and other officials expressed support for the public's demand for peace. Seeing that, many Chinese netizens criticized the Chinese regime, noting the difference. Many pointed out the regime denies the citizens freedom of speech and the right to peacefully protest. That's as it deliberately amplifies police violence in the U.S. Some also brought up a Chinese case going back to 2015. On May 2, 2015, a middle-aged man, his 80-year-old mother, and 3 children set out for the railway station on their way to a protest. But because he had a history of petitioning, he was not allowed to board the train. police shot him dead in the ensuing struggle. State-run media also failed to show footage of the incident. Authorities ruled the police officer was right to draw his weapon, but some suspect his murder was intentional. One of whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang's colleagues has died from the virus. Dr. Hu Weifeng passed away on June 2nd. According to reports, Dr. Hu was diagnosed on January 18th. He made headlines back in March after becoming one of the doctors whose skin turned black due to liver dysfunction. An official cause of death has not been released. He was a colleague of whistleblower Dr. Li back when they worked at Wuhan Central Hospital. It's unclear if they knew each other personally, as they worked in different departments. His death triggered a wave of sorrow as well as backlash against authorities for their handling of the virus outbreak. Internal documents we obtained show that in several Chinese provinces, recovered CCP virus patients are getting reinfected. The documents show that in the Inner Mongolia region, over one-third of patients who were sickened by the virus had become infected a second time after recovering. In the city of Hulunbuir, the rate was even higher, at nearly 43%. Internal documents detailing the situation in other provinces also reveal a high number of reinfections. According to the Chongqing City document, out of 570 discharged patients, 174 patients tested positive again, indicating a similar reinfection rate of over 30%. The time frame for testing positive a second time ranges from 20 to 45 days after the patient was discharged. According to a document from Guangdong, as of April 6th, out of over 1,300 discharged patients, the rate of reinfection was nearly 17%. The documents also show the reinfection rate of 5 more Chinese provinces is over 10%. The White House is barring Chinese airline companies from flying to the U.S. Beijing already isn't letting U.S. carriers come to China.
In another escalation of tensions between Washington and Beijing, the White House Wednesday placed a ban on Chinese passenger airlines from flying into the U.S. starting June 16th. The Department of Transportation said the ban will go into effect because China has failed to comply with an existing air travel agreement on flights between the world's two biggest economies. Up until this point, Chinese commercial and charter flights were still permitted to fly into the U.S. during the current health crisis, mainly to fly Chinese students back home. But China has yet to permit U.S. carriers such as Delta Airlines and United Airlines to resume any flights to China. The two companies complained to the White House about the double standard. Major U.S. airlines voluntarily stopped passenger flights between the two countries in February after President Trump banned entry of non-U.S. citizens from Chinese locations, but cargo flights kept flying. The DOT said in a formal notice that the Chinese are unable to say when they will once again let U.S. carriers reinstate flight schedules. The Chinese embassy in Washington did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
Internal recordings emerged from the World Health Organization. They show WHO officials complaining about Beijing's unwillingness to share virus data, even as the head of the agency heaped public praise on the regime for its efforts.
New information has emerged about the World Health Organization's handling of the CCP virus. It comes after President Trump announced his decision to halt funding and decades-long U.S. ties with the WHO in recent months. The World Health Organization struggled to obtain critical information about the CCP virus from Beijing in the outbreak's early stages. That counters the WHO's public praise of the Chinese regime. Recordings of internal meetings show WHO officials complained that Beijing wasn't sharing data needed to assess the virus. The recordings show that by the second week of January, WHO officials were exasperated at the lack of information. But the WHO's Director General continued to praise the regime's response, as doctors in China were prevented from sharing information. Even after a state-affiliated lab documented the full virus genome in early January, the Chinese regime didn't share the sequence with the WHO until 10 days later, and only after the information had already made it online without Beijing's authorization. Chinese authorities even ordered researchers to hand over or destroy needed virus samples. Meanwhile, the WHO's Director General called the Chinese regime's sharing of the virus sequence impressive and beyond words. Between the beginning of January, when the full genome was first decoded, and the end of the month, when the WHO declared a global emergency, the virus spread increased 100 to 200-fold. The WHO's chief of emergencies said it's similar to what happened during the SARS crisis, when the WHO struggled to get the Chinese regime to reveal data. He said that it didn't happen in the Congo with the Ebola outbreak or elsewhere, and that this scale of cover-up only happens when dealing with the Chinese regime. Associate Health Professor Adam Comrade Scott from the University of Sydney says as the CCP's lack of transparency becomes more evident, it will become more and more problematic for the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros, to continue defending China.
Less than a week after a setback in a Canadian court, China's Huawei is taking another blow. Two of Canada's largest telecom companies have made a decision that locks Huawei out of the country's 5G networks. NTD's Juliette Song reports.
Two of Canada's largest telecom companies are bypassing China's Huawei, choosing other partners for their next generation 5G network. Canada's second largest cell phone provider, Bell, said it would partner with Sweden-based Ericsson for its core 5G network. Bell's competitor, TELUS, picked Ericsson and Nokia as its equipment suppliers. The decision will leave Huawei with no major carrier customers in Canada. A second blow to the company in less than a week. Just last week, a Canadian judge ruled the company's CFO meets the legal standard to be extradited to the United States. The Canadian government has been reviewing whether to ban Huawei from the country's 5G infrastructure, but hasn't made a decision so far. Huawei has drawn much controversy over its background. As the world's second largest smartphone maker, it has close ties with the Chinese Communist regime. Washington said Huawei is a Trojan horse for Chinese intelligence. The U.S. also has repeatedly accused the company of stealing trade secrets in North America and Europe. It warned allies of not using its 5G technology, citing national security risks. The U.S. has urged Canada to ban Huawei from its 5G wireless network while cracking down on the company hard. This May, the U.S. dealt Huawei a potentially fatal blow when they imposed a rule that prevents foreign microchip makers from supplying chips to Huawei. This left the telecom giant high and dry. Over 90% of Huawei's smart chips come from a certain Taiwanese manufacturer, TSMC. That company has reportedly halted new orders from Huawei after the U.S. ban. It would be near impossible for Huawei to find another supplier that provides high-end chips. A Japanese media says MediaTek, the world's second largest mobile chip developer, helped Huawei skirt around U.S. sanctions, that they would buy chips from TSMC, rebrand as their own, and then sell to Huawei. MediaTek has denied the report and assured that it follows global trade regulations. After U.S. announced fresh sanctions that could cripple Huawei, UK government started an emergency review into its potential impact on UK's networks. Republican Senator Tom Cotton cautioned Britain that if UK allows Huawei a role in 5G networks, it could hurt military cooperation and be an issue in trade talks. Reporting by Juliette Song, NTD News, New York.
Apple is going to court after investors lost tens of billions of dollars. The lawsuit claims Apple was dishonest about declining iPhone demand.
A judge has ruled that Apple must face a lawsuit claiming it fraudulently concealed falling demand for iPhones, especially in China. On November 1, 2018, Apple CEO Tim Cook told stakeholders that demand for the iPhone was strong. But just days later, the company told its largest manufacturers to curb production. The judge assessing the case said Cook must have known that iPhone demand in China was falling before the call. On January 2, 2019, Apple unexpectedly reduced its quarterly revenue forecast by up to $9 billion. Apple's stock fell 10% the next day, erasing $74 billion of market value. The plaintiffs are now suing Apple for the drop in shareholder value.
A pro-democracy group in Hong Kong is filing a complaint with the UN. They say protesters have been abused in custody.
A Hong Kong pro-democracy group, Democisto, said Tuesday it had filed complaint with the United Nations over what it described as abuse of protesters held in custody. 3 protesters said guards had beaten and slapped them in places without surveillance cameras while in detention. They were detained over charges related to pro-democracy protests. The city government and the guards' representative have not commented on the accusations. Joshua Wong, Democisto Secretary General, called on the Japanese government as well as other world leaders to support their stance against Beijing's so-called national security law.
Especially we wish world leaders could realize that supporting Hong Kong is not about anti or pro-China or not. It's about right or wrong.
During the video news conference for journalists in Japan, pro-democracy campaigner Agnes Chow requested that Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe think twice about inviting Chinese leader Xi Jinping to visit Japan.
Be not a very appropriate timing to invite President Xi when the human rights situation and when the situation in Hong Kong is being criticized by the international community.
Police say nearly 9,000 people have been arrested and nearly 1,700 charged in Hong Kong since protests escalated last year. 2 House representatives, Brett Sherman and Ted Yoho, introduced new legislation Monday aimed at defending Hong Kong's autonomy. The bill, named the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, is the House version of a Senate bill. The House bill proposes that people violating Hong Kong's autonomy be economically sanctioned. Repeat offenders would have properties seized and be banned from entering the U.S. The State Department would also impose financial sanctions on foreign banks for doing significant transactions for those offenders. The lawmakers introduced the bill in response to an internationally criticized draft law which would allow China to arrest pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong.
A nurse in China has been denied work-related injury compensation. That's after she fell into a coma from working over 40 days straight, battling the virus on the front line in Wuhan.
It all started when 51-year-old chief nurse Shen Bei was found unconscious in her hotel room on March 7th. She had been working for more than 40 days straight, making rounds to quarantine sites in Wuhan in effort to prevent and control virus spread. When she was discovered in her hotel room, she was found to be suffering from a cerebral hemorrhage or bleeding inside the brain. Doctors managed to save her life after she was rushed to the hospital, but in the process, she was put into a coma, one she didn't wake up from for 3 months. Wuhan officials later denied Shen Bei's injury was related to her work. Local authorities claimed that China's work-related injury insurance only recognizes cases where victims died within 48 hours of the onset of the illness at work. Shen Bei's daughter explained that her mother had repeatedly said on the phone that she was extremely busy and felt lightheaded. She added Shen Bei had always been in great health, so her family didn't overthink it. According to the family, Shen Bei spent over $70 per day for treatment in the ICU. The family has so far paid more than $14,000, excluding medical insurance reimbursement. News of the incident triggered a high-profile debate on Chinese social media. Chinese netizens argued that high stress levels and being overworked certainly played a part in Shen Bei's condition. Others pointed out that work-related injury status had been approved for government officials who died of heavy drinking during official receptions. One user who appeared to be a healthcare worker left a comment saying Shen Bei's misfortune is an example of why many healthcare workers didn't want to join the fight against the virus. Many Chinese users were disappointed by the news of Shen Bei's rejected insurance claim. They say in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party, you are a warrior only when you are needed and are otherwise treated as a burden.
New York City is now providing CCP virus testing to all of its residents free of charge. And if you test positive, expect to get a phone call from a contact tracer within 24 hours. It's part of the city's program to track the whereabouts of the virus.
Testing for the virus is now free to all in New York City. City Mayor Bill de Blasio said Wednesday that until now, CCP virus testing was mostly reserved for those most at risk, including the elderly and frontline workers.
All those folks, it was crucial to focus on them first while we had a very limited supply of testing. Now we have a lot more. All New Yorkers are now welcome to come forward, get tested for free.
Those who test positive will also get a call from a contact tracer within 24 hours. Contact tracing identifies the people who might have been in contact with someone who tests positive. De Blasio urged anyone who gets a call from a contact tracer to answer it.
If you test positive, you're going to get that call, take that call, tell them about your close contacts. That's how we protect people. That's how we protect your family and every family.
The city is aiming to have 2,500 contact tracers on duty by the end of the week, with plans to build up to 5,000 or 10,000.
Walmart takes firearms and ammunition off sales floors in some locations, and the economy shows signs that the worst is over. Here's your business briefs.
There are signs that the economic slump could start its rebound soon, but private businesses laid off 2.76 million workers last month. That's small compared to the almost 20 million that were laid off in April. Even though the service industry is fighting off an 11-year low, businesses are not rushing to rehire workers as they reopen. The Institute of Supply Management reported that activity rose from its April low point but is still contracting. Walmart says it removed firearms and ammunition off of sales floors in some stores. It's a response to the riots and looting of recent days and done out of an abundance of caution. The company says the goods are still for sale while stored in a secure room. Walmart does not sell firearms in many of the major urban areas under siege from looters. The looters have latched on to the nationwide protests that emerged after the killing of a man in police custody. The Federal Reserve is allowing governors to designate transit agencies, airports, and other institutions to borrow under its municipal liquidity program. The central bank is trying to soothe the economic fallout from the CCP virus outbreak. The Fed also plans to expand its program that lets states directly issue notes to a municipal liquidity facility. Currently, only U.S. states and cities with a population of at least 250,000 residents or counties with a population of at least 500,000 have been able to make use of the program.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.